This is an MSNBC interview with this prick, Mike Lee. Mike Lee is a Tea Party guy, and he is a running buddy with Ted Cruz. Mike Lee is single-handedly responsible for blocking aid to fellow citizens located in Flint, Michigan. All of the other Republicans on the particular committee that are responsible for getting a bill out which would send funding for relief to the citizens of Flint, Michigan, basically have fallen to line, including Ted Cruz. But Mike Lee is holding the line, refusing to budge as far as releasing money out to the people of Flint, Michigan, because he wants it paid for. It's funny, when there are national disasters everywhere, I don't see him jumping up and down about making sure that the funds that are released out to wherever the disaster is are paid for. I don't see him jumping up and down as far as when there is an international disaster about where is the money going to come from when we send aid to people. So anyway, here's the interview with this prick, Mike Lee.
Republican lawmakers are now calling for a new trade deal between the U.S. and the U.K. And joining us now, Republican Senator from Utah, Mike Lee. His book, Our Lost Constitution, is out today in paperback. Good to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Senator, how are you feeling about Donald Trump? I know you're a Cruz supporter and you've been watching and waiting, I think, to wrap both your arms around our party's nominee. What's your take on the state of the Trump candidacy?
Yeah, so I have not endorsed Mr. Trump. I'm still looking for a presidential candidate who will embrace the constitutional reform agenda.
Looking where? I mean, are you saying you're still looking? You're open to someone else maybe getting in or something happening at the convention?
It seems very unlikely at this point, but you know what Mr. Trump could do is embrace some of the principles of federalism, of separation of powers, the principles that I address in my book, Our Lost Constitution, and reinvigorate the Constitution. The same movement that has made the Broadway musical Hamilton wildly popular, the same movement, the same play that helped save Hamilton's image on the $10 bill, really could come into play in this presidential election. And I think they would, and I think conservatives could start to rally more aggressively behind Donald Trump if he started to make these part of the forefront of his political message as a presidential candidate.
Might you not vote? Might you take the Jeb Bush position and simply not vote and vote for Republicans down the ticket? Is that an option for you?
Look, it's an option for everyone. I don't know that that's an option that I would pursue. I'm still hopeful that our nominee, whether it's the presumptive nominee or someone else, will take and embrace this message. Look, federalism and separation of powers are the principles at the foundation of the Constitution that have made this country great. They're neither Republican nor Democratic. They're neither liberal nor conservative. These are simply American principles. We've benefited to the extent that we've embraced them in our government. We have neglected them over the last 80 years, as I explained in Our Lost Constitution, and we'll benefit again when we re-embrace them. Donald Trump has a big opportunity. He pitches himself as a reformer, as a change agent. This would help to give some teeth to that, and I think this is an opportunity for him.
Senator, who do you think is going to be elected President of the United States in November, and why?
You know, it's really difficult to predict at this point because we are so far away from that moment. We have yet to see the interplay between the Democratic nominee and the Republican nominee. Even though we probably know the identities of both of them, there are still some uncertainties there, and we don't have the genuine chemistry that emerges once you have both conventions. Well, the polls that you've been showing this morning show Hillary Clinton with something of an edge. And yet, as you pointed out in your analysis of the polls, people aren't trusting Hillary Clinton to speak plainly. They're not trusting her as a change agent in Washington. And so that's one of the things that I think makes it a closer question.
You have actually been supportive, one of the few people that I've heard, public figures, been supportive of Britain's decision to leave the EU. Why?
Yeah, so, you know, what they experienced in the United Kingdom last week, what they've experienced in the last few years that convinced them to make this change last week was the fact that they were subject to a large, distant, centralized power a centralized power that was becoming increasingly intrusive and increasingly bureaucratic. Bureaucratic in the sense that there were laws that were foisted upon the people that were developed by unelected, unaccountable, distant bureaucrats. And so, this is something that people in Great Britain reacted to in an understandable way.
And actually, they just kept getting worse. This is one of those moments where U.S. policymakers, and we always do it with Israel, we force Israel into deals that we would never take in a billion years in the United States. But presidents force Israel into deals because they want to win a Nobel Prize for peace. We would no more subject ourselves to distant regulations from Brussels than we would turn Texas over to Mexico City. I mean, isn't it outrageous how hypocritical Americans are judging the British for doing what we would have never allowed ourselves to get into in the first place?
But that's the whole point. The British should have never entered into the EU in the first place. So since they did, obviously they're subject to all the rules and requirements of the EU. Now they have a referendum and people don't even know what the outcome is and what the effects of exiting the EU would be, but they vote to exit anyway. Then they have buyer's remorse. I lay this off on sheeple. You have all kinds of TV campaigns, both pro and against, and whoever has the strongest TV campaign is the one that wins. The people, instead of paying attention to the TV ads, should have gone out and done their own research, which they did. Unfortunately, they did their research after the votes were done. Otherwise, the outcome might have been different.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's one of the reasons why I've been working on legislation I plan to introduce this week that would maintain U.S. relations with Great Britain even after the Brexit. Notwithstanding this decision, that would maintain the status quo as far as our trade relations with them and direct the administration to start negotiating a bilateral trade agreement that would follow the Brexit. And again, it's some of these same principles that are at play here in the United States. It's different, and yet there are similar trends. The American people, as I explain in my book, are increasingly finding themselves subject to a large, distant, centralized power, one that is becoming increasingly aggressive and increasingly bureaucratic.
Right.
The good news is that we have our own constitutional system that can rein this in. We have our own system that came about in part because of the efforts of people like Alexander Hamilton, whose speech at the Constitutional Convention I describe at length in my book,
right.
That gives the power to the people. As long as we reinvigorate this document, the people will remain in charge in the United States.
I always took you as a really a Madison man, but I guess 'tis the season to talk about Hamilton.
Now, he mentioned gives the power to the people, but it's pricks like this that won't vote for universal background checks. Okay, so when he talks about giving the power to the people, pay attention to the constituents. The majority of the people want background checks. They want the gun show loophole closed. And I'm not talking about like 70%. These are like, high 80s, low 90% of the people that want these things done. But you guys that are in the pockets of the NRA and the gun manufacturers lobby, you guys don't want your funds cut off, so you are voting against the interests of the people.
Front page of the New York Times talks about a devastating loss for pro-life forces. Justices overturned Texas abortion limits. There has been the belief for some time in conservative circles that this court was going to continue moving towards outlawing abortion bit by bit, piece by piece. That certainly belief was blown out of the water yesterday in this decision, was it not?
Yeah, I believe it was, particularly given the fact that this outcome came about and this outcome would have come about, and notwithstanding the death of Justice Scalia. In other words, even if Justice Scalia had still been around, it appears that this outcome would have been exactly the same. Now, this is the first time since 2000 in a case called Stenberg versus Carhart that the court has taken this type of action. So we're talking about roughly 16 years since this type of action has occurred, and certainly it is being perceived correctly, I think, as a significant setback for the pro-life movement. Look, these were restrictions, these were health and safety restrictions.
That is a bunch of bullshit. Those were not health and safety restrictions. That was a blatant attempt to backdoor Roe v. Wade by creating a phony restriction, and regulations designed solely to close down abortion clinics. The majority of the abortion clinics and the procedures that the abortion clinics used were not surgical in nature. They were prescription or in nature, i.e., pills were given to women wanting abortions. The pills took approximately 24 hours or so to take effect. If there was going to be any problem with the therapeutic abortion, the problem would have occurred while the woman was at home, and then she could have in turn gone directly to a hospital. But the state of Texas, being the guinea pig in all of this, decided to try to push to shut down abortion clinics with ridiculous regulations, and the Supreme Court saw through the bullshit. Not one woman would have been helped by the regulations that were being imposed by the state of Texas. And when the Supreme Court justices asked them that particular question, they couldn't come up with one name that these regulations would have or had in fact helped. So it was bogus on its face, and thank God that the Supreme Court recognized that and chastised the state of Texas and their attorneys in attempting to try to do an end around on Roe v. Wade.
Imposed by the state of Texas, simply dealing with proximity to an admitting hospital, simply dealing with the health and safety standards that are applicable to an outpatient surgery facility. Right. And so a lot of pro-life activists and a lot of people who are just interested in maintaining the public health and safety of the people of Texas were confident in this case, and yet the Supreme Court saw fit to intervene. I don't think it was warranted, but it is the outcome that we are faced with.
Obviously, the court and Kennedy could have found a rational reason why the state would decide to put some of these regulations on abortion clinics. If
they did find a rational reason. They were trying to get around Roe v. Wade. So, Joe, that you're full of shit too on this one. And as an aside, they found that based on these regulations, the number of women who were at risk and performing self-induced abortions had skyrocketed. So the effect of the law in shutting down abortion clinics had the effect of putting women at risk instead of what they claimed to be the opposite action, which would have been to make it safer for women.
Chosen to. It wasn't a reach at all. They had an excuse, and they decided not to take it, and I think it's really significant.
His book is Our Lost Constitution. Senator Mike Lee, thank you very much.
Yeah, Mike Lee, you are a prick. You basically have abandoned the citizens that are located in Flint, Michigan for the dollars, but at the same time you want to quote our Constitution and how you are so much on the side of the people, and that, my friend, is not borne out by your actions.